Muy buenas tardes. Son las 19:01 de este viernes 29 de mayo, penúltimo día de la Jornada Nacional de Sana Distancia. Y estamos en el Palacio Nacional de México, en la Ciudad de México, y vamos a empezar la conferencia de prensa diaria sobre la situación de la pandemia de COVID-19, la pandemia causada por el nuevo coronavirus SARS-CoV-2. Hoy tenemos varios elementos que comentar, que son parte de lo que hemos estado platicando a lo largo de la semana. En particular vamos a tratar el informe técnico, como siempre, que lo presentaré yo, y me da, como siempre, muchísimo gusto que este sea un foro del gobierno en su conjunto. Las actividades que aquí se presentan no son de la Secretaría de Salud, son de todo el sector salud y son de todo el gobierno federal. Y así ocurre hoy, que nos acompaña nada menos que el secretario de Educación Pública, el maestro Esteban Moctezuma Barragán, con quien hemos venido trabajando la Secretaría de Salud y el Sistema Educativo Nacional, toda la autoridad educativa del país, en los distintos protocolos que él mismo presentó esta mañana. Bienvenido, secretario. Mucho gusto. Gracias. Y nos acompaña también, desde luego, nuestro querido amigo y miembro del sector salud y del sector seguridad social, es nada menos que el líder de ello, el maestro Zoe Robledo, quien tiene la encomienda de coordinar al grupo de trabajo sobre la reactivación del sector productivo con los tres nuevos sectores y lo que presentó esta mañana. Entonces, el propósito de la segunda parte, la parte temática, es precisamente atender y poder dar mayores detalles sobre los distintos elementos que tienen que ver con esta nueva normalidad. El elemento específico del sector educativo, del Sistema Educativo Nacional, y el elemento general que coordina el Seguro Social
regarding
sobre la
health programs in
seguridad
workplaces.
sanitaria en el campo de trabajo. Bienvenidos.
I will now stand up to begin with the technical report, and then we'll move on to the other topics.
Con la parte temática.
Day 68 of the National Health Distancing Program. We only have one more day left, Saturday, May the 30th, and hopefully we'll take Sunday the 31st. Even though it's not formally part of the program, we can take an extra day. It's a resting day, so we can stay at home. There's no need to go out. And then on Monday, the 1st, we'll begin with the new normal process. As we said this morning, it'll be applied throughout the country in red except for Zacatecas, which is orange. What does this mean? That the 32 states are in a high risk situation when it comes to orange, or a maximum risk when it comes to red ones. The corresponding restrictions are published in the official Gazette as per the agreement of the Ministry of Health of May the 15th. It specifies what are the activities that can be reactivated when we are in the red color, which are the three essential activities incorporating the automotive industry and mining and manufacturing. Here's a worldwide situation. 5,701,300 people have been confirmed with COVID, and they are already registered, out of which 1,510,000 have come up in the last 14 days, so they are part of the active group in the pandemic. 6.3% is the global fatality rate, and the geographical distribution is the one shown in the screen. Clearly, the Americas are in an increasing side, while Europe is in the decreasing side. Other continents, such as the Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean, are also increasing, but in a lower proportion. In Mexico, 84,624 people have been confirmed with COVID and they have been tested ever since the pandemic started on February the 8th in the country. 16,209 have been presented in the last days. So they are part of the COVID transmission, and unfortunately, 9,415 people have lost their lives because of COVID. 264,000 people have been tested, and they have turned out to be positive. And we have 140,053 people who have been disregarded. All of these cases have contributed to the identification of the patterns of the disease, of the COVID syndrome. Here we have a map of cumulative cases that has been updated since February 28th. We have 66.2 people out of 100,000 citizens that have COVID. The distribution nationally is heterogeneous, but it changes less because it's the sum of all the cases that have come up. Here we have a chart that continues to be similar to the previous ones. We don't expect it to change on the short term. We can see the cases that we've seen before, and we have a decreasing depending on each state. Here are the most recent cases, the ones that came up in the last 14 days. We can also see some stability. It hasn't changed since yesterday. Of course, figures change, but the categories don't change. That is why the colors for each state is similar or even the same than the one we saw yesterday. And we also have another chart in this slide where we can see more specifically the data. It indicates the recent cases, and we can see that the Mexico Valley is the one that has the highest activity. Here we have some changes. Puebla, for example, has changed its rating. It's followed by Tabasco, which used to be the third one, and then Baja California, Veracruz, Chiapas. Chiapas also increased its rates. It is now part of the states that have the greatest rate of incidence. This is the incidence chart. 12.7 people out of 100,000 citizens who have had COVID in the last 14 days, and it has been confirmed. Here we have the same data as the map with a system that we incorporated that I'm going to explain again because it bears repeating. This is a mechanism that allows us to monitor the changes that are seen in relation to previous weeks, and it's related to the traffic light system that we'll be applying. We can see that from May 16 to 29th, which is the last week, and the most recent, the last 15 days, which show the most active cases in gray. Here, the purpose is to see that the gray bar overcomes the green bar when there is a period that, when compared, has a lower incidence in the most recent week when compared to the last 15 days. And that's what this decreasing process shows. Let's put it with an example. Querétaro has a higher gray bar than the green one. Of course, you can see it the other way around. And same with Oaxaca. Other states like Nuevo León had less incidence than the last 15 days. Why is this important? Well, because even when the traffic light will be announced each week, we'll be presenting this info every day. So we have a monitoring system as an observation system throughout time that will change a little bit less drastically than the traffic light, but it will change. And we can't know what the trend of the traffic light will be. Here's the mortality rate, including confirmed deaths, 9,418, but also those that are just suspected cases. They are being studied. We shouldn't forget that These are part of the other mortality testing that's been done. We were working so that we can identify the death certificates of people who lost their lives, but unfortunately, we didn't have enough time for us to apply tests. So we'll be taking that data from each state and we'll presenting that information to you. This is the suspected death cases. Same thing. We have a yellow bar. The rest of the figures are the confirmed cases. Frequency hasn't changed except for Tabasco, which is now closer to the first places, overcoming Sinaloa. Here we have the suspected and confirmed cases that are part of the curve according to the occurrence date, not the notification date. Next slide. Finally, we have the cumulative curve, 84,417 plus 327 cases in the last 24 hours, which represents 4% of what we had on the previous day. 770 hospitals out of the 787 hospitals that we have been notified. Occupation increased by a percentage point, which can be seen in the following image. The map that we show you every day doesn't change that much every day, so the change is barely noticeable, but we only want you to have a gross view of the geographical distribution of the COVID hospitals. On the right side, we can see that there's a 40% occupation. Yesterday it was 39. And if we see the left side of the chart, we can see that there are some variations. Today we have 69% occupation in Mexico City, 63 in the state of Mexico, Guerrero has 62, Tabasco 56, and so on and so forth. In the next slide, we can see the bed occupation for critical cases who require invasive mechanical respirators. We can see 36% on the right, and Baja California, State of Mexico, and Chiapas, Mexico City on the fourth place in occupation rate with 71%, 69, 65, 68%. Here we have the amount of COVID hospitals that will be reporting depending on the changes that could occur. But here we can see that we've added 6 COVID hospitals, which is important. We must remember that we are always a step ahead of the excess of occupation. We have an 80% limit. Once we reach it, we expand the system. Here's what we present every week, which is the processed tests. It's of public interest. The amount of tests being processed in Mexico, we have 280,575 available tests, which are shown on the blue figure on the right, and we have 225,180 tests that are being applied in different labs that have been specifically assigned to this procedure, and they are dedicated for the monitoring of the epidemic. The next figure includes hospitals that monitor the respiratory diseases and the total amount of tests being applied by the whole network of laboratories. I must note that throughout the epidemics, more and more tests are being applied so that you can be sure that there's no limit to that. There's no quota, there's not a daily quota or a monthly quota or a state quota. The more suspected cases we have, the more tests we apply. There's no restriction to that, and there shouldn't be a rule to prohibit tests whenever there's a suspected case. According to the epidemiological procedure, we have to apply the tests in the units designed for that. If we have a serious case, 100% of those serious cases must receive a test, lab test. If unfortunately there's a fatal case that didn't allow a previous test, we must test must take a post-mortem test so that we can identify the cause of death related to COVID. Here we show the positivity rate, which is important. Why? Well, because it's the fourth criterion in the traffic light. We've already mentioned this. The traffic light includes the positivity rate, which means that out of 100 people being tested, we process the positive tests. And we've seen some stability throughout stage 3, which began here with around 41 and even 43%. If we analyze that per state, which is a chart which changed daily, we can see some states that started decreasing and reached 30 or even 25%. That's a great indicator of the fact that the epidemic it's decreasing, and it actually corresponds to other indicators we've used. One element that I want to share with you is the explanation of why we can see all red. Well, because the traffic light criteria have been designed so that we can have the maximum health monitoring when the rollback starts. Why? Well, because the entire society has one priority, which is avoid a second wave. We mentioned that this morning. If we have soft criteria, permissive criteria, then our rollback will be too fast. If one of the 4 indicators is red, then the entire traffic light will be red. And that shouldn't surprise you, the fact that it depends on each state, because some states could be red on the first one, orange on the second one, green on the third one, but as long as there's just one red criterion, the rollback won't happen, because we'd rather be more strict now, and we'll be adapting that to the change speed. And whenever we can guarantee that there is not a second wave, then we'll be analyzing softer criteria. We've designed it that way. We've already discussed that with the governors last week with the CONAGO meeting. They are all aware of the traffic light criteria. I think that's the last slide. And here we can also see the positivity percentage for different labs. Here you can see an important fact, which is related to the positive tests in the private sector, which is lower than the public sector one. Why? Well, because public sector applies tests with an epidemiological surveillance criterion, while the private sector, which is a whole network of private labs that proved they complied with the requirements, the technical requirements, and they were allowed to apply the tests. So it is more frequent to see that sometimes people go to private labs out of just confirmation, like they only want to confirm whether they're sick or not, while in the public sector we only apply tests for epidemiological surveillance, as we've seen it right from the outset. I think that's the last one. Thank you.
Sobre la nueva normalidad en el espacio laboral, que no es otra cosa más que la reactivación de la planta productiva de nuestro país. ¿Cuál ha sido la tarea, la misión del gobierno?
So what's the task of the government throughout the pandemics? To save lives. That's what institutions such as the Social Security do, the Ministry of Health, the Social Security, the Worker Social Security System, whenever they retrofit hospitals and they apply systems to attend Mexicans. But saving lives has to do with all the national health distancing campaign, but there's also a moment in which the purpose of having a balance between the health of people related to a new
el coronavirus, la COVID-19,
disease such as
frente al bienestar
COVID-19
general de las personas que empiezan a perder
versus the general
medios de
stability of
subsistencia
people who
y que la
lose
salud también se
their
puede ver
life
afectada en un sentido más
means
amplio. A
and that
partir de
could see
eso
their health
es
affected.
se ha
That's how we
establecido que
established that
la sana
the health
distancia ahora debe estar
distancing
acompañada de un sano
campaign
retorno,
has to be
el
followed
camino
by
hacia
a
la nueva
healthy new
normalidad. Y lo que
normal.
hemos establecido
So
es
what we've
que tienen que
established is
ser
the
tres
following. We
principios, que
need
tiene
three
que
main
ser
principles.
seguro,
We
es
need
decir, que el retorno
it
a los
must be
espacios
safe,
de
which
trabajo
means
no
that
pueden
going back to
significar
work doesn't
que un
mean
contagio se convierte en un brote en un
contagion
centro de
turning
trabajo.
into a new
Contagios
spread, outbreak
van a
in a
seguir habiendo, va a
workplace.
haber
Of course, there
contagios,
will be
pero que el
contagions, but
contagio no
those
se convierta
contagions
en un
cannot
riesgo para
become
el
a
resto de
risk
los
for the rest of
trabajadores
the
en un espacio
workers in
laboral
a
o para los
workplace,
propios
or even
clientes
for
o los proveedores
customers
o
or
con cualquier
providers
persona que se
or
tiene
whoever
interacción.
has an
De eso
interaction
se
with that
trata
place.
este
That's
retorno
what
seguro.
safe
La
means.
segunda parte es que
The
tiene que ser
second
saludable.
part is
Saludable
that it
tiene que
must be
ver
healthy.
con todo
Healthy
aquello que
means
contribuya al
everything that
bienestar,
contributes to
bienestar
the
y la salud
well-being and the
física, mental,
physical
pero también
well-being,
social.
mental
Y por eso
well-being,
es
and
tan
social
importante la
well-being. And
parte
that's why the
económica. Y
economic
lo
part
otro
is
es que
so
tiene que ser
important.
solidario.
And the third
Todos y cada
one is
uno de
that it must
nosotros
be
tendrá que
solidarity.
poner de su parte. A
Each of us
todos,
has to do their
empleados,
part, both
gobierno en
bosses, employers, and
en todos sus
employees, the
niveles. Esta es
government at
tarea
all
de
levels.
toda
And
la
that's
sociedad,
a
de todo el
task for
país,
everyone, for the
de toda la
entire
nación.
country.
En ese sentido, como lo saben,
In that
a partir del
sense, as
1 de
from
junio
June the
entran
1st,
tres actividades
there are
económicas
three
esenciales nuevas:
new essential
la
economic
minería, la
activities:
construcción
mining,
y la
construction,
fabricación
and
de equipos de transporte.
manufacturing
Esto
of
incluye
transportation
automotriz,
equipments, which includes
camiones,
automotive,
industria aeroespacial,
buses,
autopartes. Es una industria de las más grandes
space industry,
de
and
nuestro país,
car
de las que
parts,
generan
which
más
are some of the industries
actividad
that
económica,
are
y
more
lo mismo la
economically
construcción
active
y
in
lo
our
mismo, desde
country. Same
luego,
thing goes
la
with
minería.
construction and mining.
Entonces, lo que hemos hecho,
So
la siguiente, es
what
generar
we've
una
done is
plataforma, la
design a
plataforma
platform,
de nueva
a new
normalidad, que tiene
normal
tres
platform,
elementos:
which is
el
composed of three
registro,
elements:
la autovalidación de las
registration,
propias
auto
empresas
validation by
y
each
la
company, and the
aprobación o la
approval
validación
or
por parte del
validation by
Seguro
the
Social.
Social
Es
Security
una
system.
plataforma muy
It's a
sencilla
very
y
simple
ahorita les quiero explicar
platform.
por
I'll
qué
explain
hemos insistido tanto
why
en esta
we've insisted
plataforma,
so
aunque
much
haya
on it,
servido solamente
even
durante
though
2
it only
semanas para
worked for
3
2
sectores de la
weeks for
economía.
3 sectors.
Entran las empresas aquí, la
But
siguiente, se registran.
all companies
Se
have to do is
registran
to
aquí. Esta
enter
es
the
una prueba que estamos
website,
haciendo aquí en vivo para que puedan
register
ver
themselves.
cómo
This is
es,
a live
porque nos lo
test
han
so that you
preguntado
can
mucho.
see how
Una
it works.
persona ingresa su
So
registro
you do
patronal, cuál es la
your
razón social, el
employer's
sector en el que
registration, you
se
indicate
encuentra,
which is your
si es un patrón
sector,
primario o es un
whether it's a
proveedor.
primary
Ahí andan todos los
sector or if
datos:
you're an employer.
el
You fill
nombre
all the data
de
that's
la persona,
required, your name,
un correo
an
electrónico,
email,
un
a
teléfono.
phone number.
Ahí tienen algunos ya campos llenos para que lo
We've
podamos hacer más
already filled
rápido.
some of this information so that we
Genera
can do
todos
this
esos datos y
faster.
continúa. A
Then
partir
you
de
click on
ese
continue.
registro, puede pasar
Based on
a la
that
parte de
registration,
validación,
you can
que
move on
esta
to
es la
the
más importante. Son
validation part,
78
which is the most
preguntas de
important
validación
one. We have
precisas, preguntas
78
binarias de sí o no. Si la
questions,
industria
yes or no
o la empresa
questions, whether the
cuenta
company
con
has
entradas y salidas exclusivas de personal, en
exclusive
el caso de
entries and
que se cuenta con un solo
exits for the
acceso, cómo se
personnel,
señaliza
how do you
por dónde debe de
signal
entrar
the
cada
entrance
quien,
and the
cómo se
exit,
separa.
how do you
78 puntos
split
que son la nueva
personnel,
normalidad
etc.
ya materializada,
These
cosas nuevas que
78
no
questions
existían
are related to
antes.
the new
Una
normal,
vez que
things
llena
that
todo
didn't
esto,
used to exist.
pasan a
Once
la
you feel
siguiente,
that,
ya se hace la validación por parte del Seguro
the Social
Social.
Security
Así
system
ocurrió
does a
y así
validation.
operó durante estos 14 días para
That's
estas
how it
tres
has been
industrias.
operating
La
for
siguiente.
these three new industries.
¿Cómo lo logramos?
How did
Pues
we
de la
manage to
única
do
forma
it?
como se
Well,
puede
in
hacer
the only
esto en
way
un
we
momento tan
can,
delicado
in
de este
such a
equilibrio
delicate
entre
moment,
la sana
to find
distancia
a
y el sano
balance
retorno,
between
con
healthy
diálogo, con
distancing and
colaboración y
healthy
con involucramiento de todas las partes. En
new
este caso,
normal,
de todas las
with the
industrias, pero
collaboration
también de
of
los
everyone,
gobiernos
of the
locales,
governments,
de
of
las
the industries,
autoridades,
of
de
the
los gobernadores, la
authorities, of the
gobernadora
governors,
Pavlovich, la jefa de
Governor
gobierno,
Pavlovich,
con
our
quienes hemos estado
um,
hablando de
governor
manera
in Mexico
permanente sobre
City.
estos tres
We've all
sectores.
been
Desde
part
luego
of a
hay
constant
estados
dialogue.
en
And
donde
of course,
los tres
there are
sectores están
states that
presentes.
have
Sonora,
all the
por
three
cierto,
sectors in
es uno
there.
de ellos. Hay minería, hay
Sonora is one of
construcción,
them. They have
hay industria
construction, mining, and
automotriz, y
automotive
así
industry,
con
and
todos y
that's the
cada uno de
same
ellos, y
with each
con las
state.
previsiones en este momento de
So right
cuáles
now
son
we are
las
just
curvas
looking forward to
epidemiológicas. La siguiente.
establish what are the
Ahora, ¿Cómo vamos? Lo
rules
mencionamos
for
en la mañana,
the
muy bien.
epidemiological surveillance.
Este dato se va actualizando. En
This
la
data
mañana
will
eran
be
15.000 y ahorita
updated.
ya llevamos
In the morning we had
16.626
15,000 and
registros de estos
now we
tres
have
sectores.
16,000
9.037 de
registered
construcción,
companies,
7.587 de transporte, 2.004 minería.
5,587 for
¿Me siguen?
transportation, 9,000 for construction, and 2,000
Ahora,
for mining.
¿qué es lo que sigue? Y esto es la
What's
parte
next?
importante.
This is
Porque
the
son
important
15.000
part
registros
because we have
patronales de cerca de 1 millón.
15,000 out of
Y
1
muchos de
million
estos tienen que
employers
ver con
registration.
los otros
And this has to do
puntos.
with all the
Estos son los que
other
hemos llamado neoesenciales.
groups.
Pero hay
These
esenciales
are the
que
new
también nos
essential
están
ones, but we have
solicitando que hagan
previous
este mismo
essential
procedimiento
ones
de
who
autovalidación,
are being
pero con la
required to
diferencia
do the
que ya no tendrán que
validation
esperar
process with the
la
difference that
notificación
they
del
won't
Seguro
have
Social.
to,
La autovalidación, bajo protesta de
to
decir
wait for
verdad,
the
se llena
Social
y a
Security
partir de eso se
validation.
les
They'll
da,
just fill the
digamos que
questionnaire
de manera
and they will
automática,
automatically
ya no
receive
hay una
the
intervención
validation. There's
humana,
no
sino que de manera
human
automática se registra
interaction.
que esa persona ha
The
manifestado
system
que ha llevado a
registers
cabo
that that
todo un
person has gone
protocolo
through
de
a
seguridad en el
security
trabajo.
protocol in the
Esto para
workplace.
las esenciales
This is
originales
for the
y también
previous
irlo
essential
haciendo ya con el
industries,
semáforo
but
de
now
la
with
Secretaría
the
de
new
Salud
traffic
para
light, we can
las que
apply
vayan
it
a convertirse
to
en
the
actividades
activities
esenciales
that will
o
be deemed
actividades
essential
que
or
no son
activities that
esenciales,
are
pero
not
que el semáforo ya
essential,
les permite
but
trabajar.
that will be
¿Cuáles son las
reactivated
esenciales
according to the
originales? Porque ese
traffic
es un
light. So what
asunto
are the
que damos a veces
original
por hecho que
essential
todo el mundo
activities?
sabe.
We
El
assume
siguiente,
everyone knows that, but maybe
el
not.
transporte de carga, la industria química, las farmacias, las
Fleet,
ferreterías, el
pharmacies,
servicio de
hardware
mensajería, las
stores,
funerarias, los
messaging, funerary,
supermercados,
supermarkets,
las tiendas de autoservicios, la aviación, desde luego
aviation,
los
of course,
hospitales, las guarderías,
hospitals,
la seguridad
daycare,
privada, las
private security,
telecomunicaciones, ustedes, los medios de
telecommunications, you, the
comunicación,
media.
que por eso siguen y pueden seguir
This is why
trabajando.
you can
Estas son
continue with
todas las
your
unidades
work. These
económicas
are all
que
the
están
economic
trabajando
activities
durante los
that
picos
are
más altos
working
de la
all
pandemia,
throughout the
porque son
highest peak
esenciales.
of the
Ahora lo que
pandemics because
queremos
they
es
are
simplemente
essential
que se
now.
registren
All
y
we
que hagan
want
la
is for you to
autovalidación.
register
La
yourself
siguiente,
and to do the validation.
creo que algo bien
There's
importante
something very
que debemos
important here,
de destacar y de
something we
comunicar
should
y
highlight,
de explicar muy
and
bien
that we
a
should
la población,
explain
particularmente en este caso
to
a
the
los trabajadores,
population, specifically
es
workers,
que
which
la
is
cuarentena, si lo vemos
that
como parte de una película de nuestra
if we
vida,
see quarantine as part of
no
our
significa
lives,
que le hayamos puesto
this
pausa
doesn't mean
a la
that we
película
are
y que
pausing the
entonces porque le
movie
damos
of
pausa
our
regresamos
lives.
al momento donde
And
estábamos.
then when
No
we
es así.
resume it, we go
Es como
back
si
to
lo hubiéramos
normal. But
adelantado
it's
de
not like
capítulo.
that. It's
Vamos a
like
regresar a los
forwarding
ciclos
the
laborales
movie.
y ya no va a ser
We'll go
igual.
back to
La vida ya
work
no va a
and
ser
life will
igual.
not be the
El
same.
entorno,
The
las conductas,
environment, the
los hábitos
behavior,
deben de haber
habits
cambiado.
must
Si no han
change.
cambiado,
Otherwise,
es que algo estamos
we are
haciendo
doing
mal.
something
Si
wrong.
no han
If we
cambiado,
don't
es que
change
eso
them,
que
it's
estemos
because
haciendo mal
whatever we are
es
doing
un
wrong
riesgo
is
para
a
las
risk
personas.
for
Aquí
people.
pongo algunos ejemplos
Here are
reales
some
de algunas plantas
real
que ya hemos
examples of some
estado
of
en
the
contacto con
plants
ellas.
that we've
Así se
visited.
entraba una planta antes.
That's how
En
you
esta,
entered a plant
así era.
before, like the
Ahora ya
image
no
on
va a
the
ser
left.
así.
Well,
Tiene que
it
ser
won't be like
así.
that
Y
anymore. It will be
señalito.
like the
Esto
image
es lo
on
que
the right
llamamos
with
ingeniería,
signals.
que
That's what
tienen
we
que
call
haber
engineering.
señales
We must
claras.
have
Ustedes
clear
mismos,
signaling
si ven que hace
signs
un año la
so
conferencia
that
nos se
people know
sentaban
how to
con
behave.
menos distancia. La gente que
Previously, in
siempre
this
sentaba en
conference,
una mesa
you
como esta se
used to
sentaba con menos
sit
distancia. Pero
close to
así
each
tiene que ser
other,
en
but
todos
that
lados.
is
La
not how you do
siguiente.
it now.
Esta parte que es la que nos interesaba
This is one
mucho
of
es el
the
primer
parts
punto
that
de
we were
validatación.
most
¿Cómo son
interested
los
in.
filtros de entrada? Pues antes
The entry
se hacían de
filters.
manera
Before,
muy
they
común
were
cuando se tenía, por ejemplo, de
done,
un estacionamiento.
for
Ahora
example,
tienen
in
que estar
parking lots,
señalados,
but now they
pintados
have to have
literalmente,
specific
con
spots for
señales por
it.
dónde debe de caminar la
They
gente
must
y en
have
qué
a
sentido.
clear
Eso es
signaling
la
as to
nueva
where people
normalidad,
should
porque
walk,
esto
for
es para siempre
example.
ahora.
And that's the new
Tenemos que
normal,
empezar a
and that's
vivir con
going to
esto
be
como parte ya
for
de
the
nuestras
rest of our
costumbres,
lives. We
como
have
aprendimos
to make
a
this
no
part
circular
of
muy
our
bien quien no
routine.
circula, o
For
como
example,
aprendimos
how
a
we
no correr a
learned
mitad
to
y
not
no
use
empujar
our
al
car on
velocísimo.
certain
Antes no lo
days or
sabíamos, ahora lo
not
debemos de saber.
running when
La
there's an
siguiente.
earthquake.
Por ejemplo, los filtros. Este tipo
Filters are
de
an
herramientas como los tapetes
example.
sanitizantes van a empezar a
Equipment such
convertirse en
as the
elementos cada vez más
sanitizing
comunes. Son
carpets
tapetes
will
que
become
parecen
more and
incluso
more
tienen agua con cloro, o bueno, ya por ahí el
common.
doctor López
All
Gatel
they
puede decir
are
cómo se hace esta
carpets
solución,
with
pero que es para que unos
chlorine and
zapatos que puedan
water, and
tener
they are used
estar
so that we
contaminados
can
se
clean
limpien
contaminated shoes
al pasar
before
por ellos.
entering
Los filtros
the
vehiculares, las
facilities. taking temperature when you are in your car. When you get here, you go through a temperature filter. That didn't used to happen, but now it has to happen because it's part of the way in which a company can identify a sick person and That's how they can tell them to go take a test or to avoid risks for their families, etc. And I think that's it. That's what we're going to have to keep explaining. And there's a lot to say about it. There's a lot to say about continuous scheduling, about the health promotion in the workplace. And that's what the president put us in charge of, so that we can explain this to you throughout the following 3 days, so that you are all aware of this, and so that when June 1st comes, we know what to do. And last but not least, co-responsibility based on trust. We trust on the fact that all companies have done that and that they're ready, that they are prepared. We believe them. But we also ask workers to monitor that, and that whenever they don't see companies doing this, they should speak out, because the most important thing here is the health of workers. Of course, we also have public spaces, social spaces, but in this case, when it comes to economic reactivation, which is the one that'll have the greatest promotion as of June 1st, we have to be more aware of that. And I think that if we work together, it'll be successful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Zoe Robledo.
Please, could you please zoom in? This morning we presented the overall plan of the guidelines for going back to school according to the new normal. In these 3 days, what I'd like is to itemize a little bit more in those topics that are more important for the general society, mothers, fathers, teachers, and mainly the children and young people. The first point is that going back to school in basic education is going to be whenever we reach the green light in our color coding. We have here some reference dates in case that we have the green light. And these are reference dates. It says that. We are looking forward to it, but the condition, and by quoting a very famous spokesperson, is, will say, if and only if we are reaching the green light. The onset date, the commencement for this new cycle 2020 to 2021 would be August the 10th, as it has been specified right there. On August 10, we get started with cycle 2021, and then we'll get started with our lessons if we reach the green light for basic school, that is kinder, preschool, primary school, and junior high or secondary school. That'll be August 10. Now, next week, this next Friday, June the 5th, we would be concluding the Learn at Home. But there is also a series of work that should be developed by teachers, and we call that the administrative load, because they need to close the course from 19th to 2020. They need to then assess each one of the students, and the course that this new cycle 1920 is going to end by July the 6th. But this will be due to the load of work that teachers will have, and indeed, and as of June the 6th, children will not have any content that is going to be assessed or evaluated later on more than what has been shown on TV or internet for them. And the interaction between teachers and students is going to vary because it is not going to be about learning purposes. These will be topics more oriented to assessing their work. So then, this is how we can close this cycle 2019-2020 and getting started with 2020-2021 on August the 10th. This is a bottom line topic, and I'm talking about basic education. In the middle high education region, we're going to have the onset of this cycle 2021 with a remedy course for leveling all those students who maybe did not have any internet connection, or that maybe they could not take all the subjects because it would be that maybe only one teacher could then assess it all, but they have one teacher per specialty. That's why they'll get started on August 10th for those presented delays. And in higher education, we have an agreement with ANUYES. It is the organization that would be collecting the public universities all together of not getting started with their courses before September the 7th. So the closest for the course to get started would be September the 7th. For instance, the Autonomous University of Mexico has announced that they are going to open up on September 21st. These are autonomous decisions precisely because we are talking about public universities and the higher education area. This is in very general terms. That is something I wanted to clarify because we've been having many questions around this topic. That's how we are closing the cycle 1920. We will be having an assessment on behalf of teachers, and we are going to get started on August 10th with basic education and the new cycle 2021. Since the learning at home program has been very successful, we created the Ministry of Education dedicated channel where we are going to have education materials that would be supplementing the education for children that would like to learn supplementary topics in addition to what they learn in regular school. And during the summer, you can see that we have the program ending on the 5th, and they will have fun, ludic materials the whole time until reaching the remedy course for beginning a new cycle. Thank you. Thank you, Secretary. Now we're going to give the floor to Blanca Aguirre Notimex, you, Saturnino, and also back there and on this side too. Thank you very much. Good evening, Bianca Aguirre from Notimex TV. And I'd like to ask you, Mr. Secretary, well, Undersecretary, if COVID-19 is transmitted in the breastfeeding babies, and the mother is not a carrier of COVID-19, and nevertheless, this baby was born with COVID, and the Ministry of Education. I'd like to ask you if we have posed the fact that at a national level, we have 20% of schools that would have no water supply, which is very important for hygiene. During pandemic, 32% of the schools would only have water for a couple of days, and the 23% would be using large containers for water. And I would also like to know about the dates for the exams. When are these going to be? Are they going to use the same application venues as posed before? And finally, Mr. Zoe, good evening. You were telling us about the sanitizing mats. Is it also useful to use the sanitizing arcs, as Mr. Gattel said before. We can remember that, but there are some companies that are going back to the new normal, thinking that it would be a good idea acquiring this type of arcs, or maybe not. Please. Well, in terms of water, we have an extremely important issue. As a matter of fact, we inherited that status in public schools, and our president for now maybe a year by now created a program called The School is Ours. La escuela es nuestra in Spanish. That's how resources are being transferred to schools for them to improve their infrastructure, improve their gear, and to keep up and maintain the schools in good shape. And we have 28,000 schools receiving that resource so far, and our next goal for the next few weeks is going to reach 47,000 schools. And this matches with the schools that have no running water, because the priority was given to high margination areas and also indigenous communities. So a great deal of these schools that did have no water at all with this new resource, they now are going to be able to use drinking water, or to improve their toilet facilities. We are giving guidance and guidelines to those schools for those extreme cases where there is no running water, to actually get it, transport it in containers in order to establish practical mechanisms for children to wash their hands continuously. And we are also suggesting schools receiving resources through the School is Ours program, that one of the possibilities they should be exploring is to give priority water supply. And what is your other question, please? Yes, in terms of the exams, we are going to separate them in such a way that we will not experience any issue with the long lines that at times would be even more complicated. We are going to publish all of these news. We are going to let everybody know about the venues. It's going to be for the 8th and 9th of August, and 15th and 16th of August. All of this is going to be published on our website and on the general media for informing the students population that would like to take such exams. Thanks, Bianca, for your question. I would answer your question very concretely. We've been studying this, and since the epidemic got started in China, we've seen cases that are apparently from breastfeeding infection. This has been more formally studied, and the conclusion and the consensus, scientifically speaking, in the world is saying that this virus SARS-CoV-2 is not going to be provoking any infections through breastfeeding. Breastfeeding is an extraordinarily important element to guarantee health, not only for the baby during his first 6 months of life, that should be exclusive for this type of babies to only breastfeed, and they should continue all the way up to 2 years old, of course, supplemented with other types of nutrients. We have a lot of scientific evidence that is showing that this is a protection mechanism in terms of general health for infection, diseases, chronic diseases that are now being the cause for complications in terms of COVID would also have a protection element. The history of breastfeeding should be taken into account. Breastfeeding for women is also protecting against the breast cancer. And thanks for asking this, because Mexico has one of the lowest onset of breastfeeding periods. Mexico in the world is one of those countries that is not achieving breastfeeding all the way to the 6 months of age and supplementary until 2 years of age. We have the worst indexes in Latin America, I must say. And in these times of COVID, it has gotten our attention that we are seeing that now the companies that are producing milk that are also called the formulas, the baby formulas, as they are called, and this is opposite to a global agreement existing since 1981 that is called the Code for Trading. And this is an agreement, and we could call it as an ethical commitment between different governments since 1981 that are pertaining to WHO in order to promote less those substitutes of natural milk, so we can give more boost to breastfeeding. This is another action that is added up. Also, those very processed foods that are taking us to obesity epidemic and diabetes around the world, and that is something we'll keep on working. Thank you very much, Bianca. And precisely, we are asking about these very practical topics that we need to know whenever we have the list of assessment with the health assessment. The first table is about the engineering measures in terms of a structure. And the second question has to deal with this, and let me read it to you aloud so we can know the answer from the companies. The second question is, does the company have at the entrances the sanitizing mats or other alternatives, or are they giving any shoe protectors in substitution? And we are saying to companies that we are not recommending sanitizing arcs. Other questions are about the sanitizing mats, if they are using sodium hypochlorite with a certain concentration, and if they are using it repeatedly. Because in this case, it is important to say that this self-assessment list is also different according to the size of the company. A manufacturing site with more than 250 workers up to 1,000, we need to be more strict with more approving points. And as the size is less, it is not that we are relaxing the measures, we only have less points of evidence. But in this specific case, we are not posing that we need the sanitizing arcs, as they are called. Thank you. We have Liz and you, please. And we also said that you, Liz, and then you. Hi, Mr. Hugo Lopez Gatell, doctor. Just a couple of days ago, Basta Journal reported about arthritis patients without receiving their treatment, their drugs, and this type of patients suffering from this disease, they are now suffering even further. And what is going to happen to them? They are very concerned. And for Mr. Zoe Robledo, I'd like to ask that you rely on the protocols of sanitizing and cleaning, and what kind of sanctions would they get if they do not obey? Please, Zoe, answer that question first. In the first place, whenever we have the self-assessment in place and we are using the under oath statement, and before sending the assessment, we are establishing that the sender knows that he's under oath. and accepting also a couple of things. On the one hand, that there is companionship and counseling on behalf of the Social Security Institute, and also that we can have other authorities involvement. We've spoken with several state governments, and that also associations and chambers are giving the possibility of contributing during inspection period. And also the Ministry of Labor has informed that we had an authorization in terms of budget in order to reach 5,000 verifications. That would have different implications. And in the case of Social Security, even though this mechanism could be a little bit slower, that would take a little bit longer, is that as of the monitoring of the disability certificates, whenever we see many of these types of certificates, then we would have to go into action. But that is in the case of non-compliance, whenever we have the self-assessment in order to work. And this is the agreement as it was published in the official gazette on the 14th and the addendum on the 15th, that we would be accepting and acknowledge that in case of non-compliance, we would have to close that company down. That happens with the citizens' reliance system, where we are trusting the provisions in the case of civil protection, but in the case of having any random inspection, close down might follow. And we believe that the best, and that's how it has been happening, the companies themselves are sending evidence, just as we saw, as we displayed right here, that they are complying. They are in need of kickstarting once again in a staggered way, with only some percentage, not the whole head count. But in any case, it is important for them to go on. So we are looking for balance between the self-assessment, self-regulation, compliance, and all. The key piece would be the workers, because if the workers give evidence that something is missing and that is representing a risk, then they need to file a claim. We have here an emerging positive news. The reason why the Minister of Health did not come here, Mr. Alcocer, is because he wanted to see the children suffering from cancer and their petitions to the Minister of Health. And now I'm learning that they have solved the issue, and now they will be getting ahead in a collaboration status. Well, this is the only thing I know for the time being, and I believe that tomorrow we'll be able to confirm further. And I'm going to read very attentively your report, and tomorrow we can tackle it more extensively. Please go ahead. Good afternoon, Mr. Undersecretary and the Secretary of Public Education, and Mr. Soe. I came 3 weeks ago. Maybe you remember me. I came here to talk about the back to school, and I was talking about a video from China. And since we have a very good relationship with the with China, I would like to show this video to the Secretary of Public Education. It is about a protocol on how to receive a student in a basic level education, and how they would be receiving. Yes, I know about that video. Yes, this is in China, sir. And I'm not going to ask you to mimic or copy this, but at least I think that it would be a good idea to consider it. And also, by thinking on what you were presenting before, how we are going to reach that green light. I have my questions in that sense, but I believe that, as my colleague right here just said, and also talking about water, we have an essential topic there. Without water, they won't be able to wash their hands as students. So that's everything I wanted to say, just to show you this video, or maybe you can tell us about the contact with the other authorities implementing this type of protocol. I want to thank you deeply with this contribution. I do know that video, and that's the way they receive students in China. I don't know if that's how they would do it in every school at large, but everything we are going to do in Mexico should be multiplied by 237,000 schools. So it is essential to do whatever is strictly protecting the health of children and teachers alike. But there are many other things that indeed are not that necessary. Just this morning, I was showing that in another country, they were drawing squares on the floor, and that's how children were indicated to stay there and not going out from there. Now that we are going back to school, and this is something I need to stress out, is that we need the green light first. Whenever we have the green light, all the activities are going to be released from any health restriction, all of them. And if we have the green light, then they can play football, they can go to the movies, they can go to a cafe, they can have family gatherings, or going to restaurants. That is going to be the moment in which we are lifting the health measures, and we are left with the new culture that we need to make our own in terms of taking care of not only COVID, but any other future that might unfold. That's why in schools we are stressing out the fact that water and soap are essential. And I've been asking Dr. right here many times, what is better, to use gel in schools or water and soap? And his answer has been water and soap. Yes, water and soap. So we must insist on that. He's been saying many interesting things for the education sector. For instance, if you have water and soap, you are cleaning, but you add chlorine in order to upgrade that mix, what you are doing is that you are actually eating it. And I believe that I am going far away from my jurisdiction, but we are preparing a list, some guidelines, and the Ministry of Health is going to train us formally, so everyone will get to know exactly what to do. And we are not going to do any sophisticated stuff. We're going to be effective in our actions, and they are going to be executable, because many times whenever we try to do sophisticated things, we do not reach the essence, and the essence is the health of children and teachers. Yeah, the training, the formal training I'm talking about is for the Participation Council of Health. And one of the things that we agreed on last Saturday, March the 14th, whenever we announced to break then on March 23rd, we had that preparation week. And in that week, we told every student to grab their books to take home for studying. Certain homeworks, guides were given to children for them to study at home. Another thing is that we created in every school committees for health participation. These are committees that are now permanent in schools, made up with teachers and parents. And schools that did not do it in the past for some reason are going to do it whenever we go back to school. So they will now handle the health issues directly. One of the great benefits that we have obtained from this distance is that we have the responsibility of parents in participating in education of their children. So we introduced that in our constitution in order to establish co-responsibility, and we have gone ahead in that sense. Thank you, Secretary. It's 8 p.m. Tomorrow we'll get started with the rest of the question, and we call it a day. Thank you, Mr. Director and Mr. Secretary.